Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering What We Do in the Shadows, Season 3, Episode 6, The Escape. In this episode, the co-heads of the Vampiric Council have once again fucked things up pretty badly, and actually it all winds up working out a lot better than it had a right to. They really should count themselves quite lucky that they're just very lucky. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Max for commissioning this episode. So, yeah, this one was really, really fun. I like this episode a lot. There's, again, more lore stuff coming up. And I think I had said something at one point about how there's the trope of you murdered the, oldest or the head of any particular monster class, and all of a sudden all the monsters die. And that I wasn't a big fan of that as a concept, even though there were times where I sort of understood its necessity within the storytelling. And I was really excited that it gets brought up here, although it isn't definitive whether or not this actually works. And I am fine with it. I don't need it to be definitive. I just like for it to be sort of acknowledged. And I think it's kind of fun that our friends don't actually know whether it's true or not. It's treated kind of as an old wives' tale, if that's the appropriate thing to call it, an old vampire's tale. That if you kill the sire, all vampires across the world die. It just, the fact that they don't really know for sure makes a lot more sense than them actually knowing. Because if the only way you would know is if it had happened at one point. And if it had happened, then nobody would be around to say that it had happened. So this, to me, is a lot if you're watching a movie and you find out that the head of anything or the oldest of anything being killed means the others die, really, how do they figure it out? I feel like the only times that this has been explained in a way that is coherent is either that it's a guess and we're just going to go with our best guess, or it's worked on another sort of separate, smaller group, and then we're going to apply it to the bigger group. And then there's the third option, which is my least favorite, which is it is written. Somewhere there's a prophecy or an ancient text that explains, and I really don't care for that one. I'm never a fan, really, of a thing just being written down in a manual somewhere. Except in pretty rare cases. So, yeah, the uncertainty of this, especially in light of the fact that the Baron turns out to not be dead. I am so excited about this. The Baron was delightful. He does not remember that it's Guillermo who opened the door, so that's great. And he is now in this weird, half body, so he has to be sort of carried around. And it's not really, I don't believe that the way it works out in this universe, that he will ever get a full body back. Because there are, some lores, vampire lores, in which you do them an injury and they wind up healing quite quickly. And that can mean regrowing parts. And then there are lores in which you can heal certain injuries that are puncture wounds or stab wounds or whatever. But then there are certain things that you are never going to recover from. And especially, I just made up a new word. Especially, I think I was combining it with usually. Those wounds often are from sunlight or fire. Those tend to be the ones that are irreparable. Something that would otherwise have caused their death, those leave lasting marks. So the fact that the Baron got burned almost completely up by the sun, it makes total sense to me that he would never actually recover his full body. And, I had mentioned in the episode where he's buried the flash of light, and I wasn't really sure what to make of that because he looked so dead. And I really enjoy the hint being left that he's still alive, and then we just sort of leave it for episodes at a time. And I'm sure this has less to do with storytelling and more to do with the fact that the guy they cast as this character couldn't be there all the time. But I do like letting it sort of simmer in the background and not be something that we particularly consider again. And I really like too that him coming back isn't necessarily a huge throwing a wrench in the works, because I was worried that if the Baron isn't dead and he returns, it's going to be a whole thing with him and the others and with Guillermo. It didn't occur to me that he might not actually really remember what had happened because he was so fucked up. So him returning has not led to any particular negative consequence other than them having to figure out a place for him to live, which they wind up coming up with a pretty good solution eventually, which is very fun. So anyway, there were a lot of developments this episode that I found delightful. So let's begin things here. We have the reminder of who the Sire is in the cold open, and it's just a flashback to Colin opening the little trap door. And then we go to Nandor and Nadja, who are talking about the Sire, and they keep each of them, when the other speaks and says as the leader, the other has to interrupt and say co-leader. And then they make the same exact mistake when they are then speaking later. But it turns out they're bringing up the Sire because they made a boo-boo and the Sire escaped. And it turns out he tunneled his way out of his little prison cell using the bones of his victims, as shovels, which makes sense to me. Why not? And what we come to find out, because at first it's treated like Nandor was supposed to have been feeding him, and he neglected his duties, and he is the reason why the Sire has run off. We then get a little aside with Nadja, who realizes that she was supposed to tell Nandor to feed the Sire. And she wrote it on a sticky note, and she forgot to ever actually mention it to him. And so the way this works is that she continues to let him think that she did tell him and that he simply forgot, which is really cruel because Nandor is so prepared to take on the blame for this and really gets extremely emotional a couple times about how bad he's fucked up. And there comes one moment where it looks like maybe Nadja is going to confess to him that she is actually the one who screwed up, and she winds up not doing it. And as much as I really disapprove of her laying the blame on him this way, and as much as I hate the fact that he believed her so quickly, he really just took her word for it, I also am prepared to lay a little bit more of the responsibility for this at Nandor's feet, because it seems like the implication here is that Nadja is really the one in charge and she has to delegate. And if she doesn't explicitly tell him what to do, he isn't going to do it. So basically what I'm saying is, she shouldn't have to tell him to feed the Sire. If he's a co-leader, he should be aware that the Sire needs feeding and be proactive about taking care of that. But if he hasn't done anything with that, and it's just because she never gave him instructions, In my mind, that implies they are not co-leaders. Nadja is the de facto leader. He admits that he accepts her instruction and orders. And that pretty much says everything about what the power structure really is here. So basically where I come down on this is, yes, Nadja fucked up in not delegating adequately and not keeping track of this. But Nandor is insisting that he is co-leader and then acting like this is news to him that they even had to feed the sire, which has me going, what do you even do here? Like, what is it? He comes downstairs and the only thing that he like complains about is that they have gotten rid of his like organizational system, which I don't really know much about how that is set to work. But you have a very alive undead and very important being in your care. And I feel like that really should take priority over the way that you're organizing your library. I'm just saying. So, in summary, Nadja screwed up, but her screw up shouldn't have resulted in this kind of consequence if Nandor was actually competent in any way. So that's where it comes down to for me. It's like, I'm not even really going to blame Nadja. I don't like her gaslighting him and telling him that she did in fact give him these instructions. But honestly, again, she shouldn't have to give him these instructions because it should be understood this is part of your deal and you should be finding out whether it's taken care of on your end as well. And just as somebody who tends to wind up being responsible for a lot more than I agreed to because the people around me don't want to take on their share and be alert and present for what's expected of them, I have a lot less tolerance for this sort of like goofy man-child bit. And thus, I had been saying from the start that Nadja really is the one that should be in charge. And I fucking stand by that, man. Like, it's just, Nandor isn't up to it. He looks imposing. And because of this, will be granted respect initially. And the minute you start talking to him, any sort of interaction, it's very clear that he is not to be taken seriously. It's wild that he was ever in charge of like campaigns, you know, as a military general. I don't know how his personality had to have changed over the course of time because I simply do not see it. And yeah, I'm really wondering if this is going to be a recurring thing because really the show has set up Nadja to be the one semi-competent one. I'm really putting an asterisk after competent because as we see, she screwed up here. She doesn't like get it right all the time, but she seems to be often the one who understands things a little bit more thoroughly. There's obvious exceptions, and the way she deals with Guillermo is one of the big ones. But yeah, so long story short, the Sire has gotten out and he is out on the town and they are freaking out because they believe in the story that if the Sire gets killed, then all vampires will die. And Laszlo and Colin do not believe in this, at least not initially. Laszlo is certain it's not true because their own sire, the Baron, has died and they are still alive. And him and Colin begin to reflect on how definitely, yes, the sire is dead for sure. And then as they say it, it really starts to sink in with both of them that, wait, but is he though? And they take off and get a shovel and find Guillermo and begin digging up the yard, trying to figure out where he is. And I did really appreciate how tricky it is because they have so many bodies already buried in the backyard. Because that was my question, was sort of like, I didn't remember if they put a stone in place. I couldn't recall exactly how they marked, if they did at all, where he was buried. But all I could think was just, I mean, how many bodies are you going to come across before you find him? And indeed, there's a few, and somehow Colin remembers each of them and who they are. And I am really curious about that. I'm going to go ahead and assume that it's like that he has just such an organized brain that he remembers where everybody's buried simply as like part of his weird fixation on minutia that doesn't matter to other people. However, if that's it, I really want to see a little bit more of him like remembering very, very specific weird stuff like this in the future, because I feel like this could be a pretty good running gag. However, eventually they start to think that maybe he is actually alive, and they just begin calling around. Baron, are you there? And unexpectedly, he just begins to answer. Hello, yes, I'm here, help me. Which really caught me quite off guard. I was not thinking that he was going to be audible. If he were still alive, I definitely didn't expect him to be as chipper and with it as he turns out to be. But indeed he is. He is up here with his half body and one arm fused to him. I love the fact that he figures out he's been digging sideways this whole time, because he was trying to dig his way out first with his mouth and then with his arm like that's fused to his chest, which I think he eventually gets that arm like partially off. And when he says something about how he must have been digging sideways, Colin says something like, oh yeah, well, that happens when your arm is, yeah. I really, really enjoy Colin attempting to like commiserate on a thing that he has no idea about. Like, I think what I enjoy about it is that he is so often feeding on the awkwardness of other people that when he has these moments of himself being deeply awkward, I'm kind of like, ha, that's what you get. That's what you feed off of, you sick fuck. So we'll come back to that. But first, we have to deal with Nandor and his decision. He is just not really thinking things through here, kiddos. What Nandor wants to do is call a press conference and share his fuck up, basically, with everybody. And it's truly baffling. Like, there is just absolutely, in my opinion, no reason for this. What he says he's doing is reassuring the people that he is, wanting to set their minds at ease. And it's not really dealt with that they don't know anything to begin with. So why would their minds need to be set at ease to begin with? You don't need it. But he is the kind of person, and I really do sympathize with this, he is the kind of person that needs to talk about his troubles to somebody. He is simply not able to keep his mouth shut and move on with whatever it is, So as somebody who also kind of has this issue, I really get it. The temptation to always over-explain in situations where maybe that's not what we want, actually, And Nadja, I think, because she's letting him believe he fucked up, she decides it's best to sort of let him get this out of his system, I think. That's the way I'm sort of interpreting it, because it's odd to me. It's not that she doesn't express any reservations. She certainly has her moment of just like, we don't need to do this, dude. But she doesn't actually stop him. She just sort of expresses frustration, and then she steps back and lets him do what he's going to do, which I was kind of surprised by, I just felt like, okay, sure, but it doesn't, I wanted her to put up more of a fight than she does. And I'm wondering if she's trying to sort of maybe, and I think I'm giving her too much credit for this, but and maybe she's like setting up that he can't do the job, and she's going to mount a series of like, basically use this as ammunition in the future to point out how bad at the job he actually is. And again, I do think I'm probably giving her too much credit, but if this were part of an overall plan, I would be proud of her. And again, I just do think she is much more the one for the job. It's just simply embarrassing to watch him muddle through this. He just doesn't really seem he doesn't even really seem to want the job. It's just the actual throne and like the ego factor of sitting on it. But in terms of doing the job, I mean, this is the thing with so many people, though, I guess, isn't it? I'm acting like this is really mystifying. And frankly, it is mystifying to me, somebody like me. But there are so many people out there, a recent president especially comes to mind, who genuinely don't seem to want the job that they are also desperate to have. And I guess that's where it comes from. Oh, Miss T in the chat says, oh, he's an external processor. That makes sense. Yeah, I think so. And like, if you are that type of person, this is not a job for you. Like, you can't be in politics and be that way. If you are going to be that way, and I'm saying politics, you know, with a very like sort of generous hand here, but if you're going to be like that, you need a buffer between you and the rest of the people to sort of you just roll it by him and see, okay, is this like something that I should say or no? Like, this is something that Adele had happen. I don't know how many people even remember this, but Adele had a period where she was just fucking saying anything on her Twitters. And I don't remember the specific thing that she said, but there did come a day where she pissed somebody off by like kind of speaking out of turn. I don't remember if maybe she was sort of drunk or just over emotional, and she said something on her Twitter. And the next day she was like, all right, look, sorry, everybody. I've hired an assistant and this won't happen again. And essentially just, you know, did a mea culpa and admitted she can't be trusted as somebody who is as high profile as she is to have control over her own social media because it's too immediate. If it's somebody like me, you know, I have like barely like 2,000 followers, I think. I post something and I can delete it and probably nobody is going to notice. If you are Adele and you post something, and especially if it's at all questionable, there are millions of people that are like going to be screenshotting that thing immediately. And you can delete it all you want, but it will live forever now. Like, it's just too late. So that's, if Nandor had social media, like access to it in a way, he could, by the way, in this universe, that is certainly a possibility for him, but he simply just doesn't know how to use it. Which reminds me, actually, the episode, I can't remember if it was the previous one or no, I think it's the episode Gale. I don't feel like I even like really talked about it, but they were trying to set up the website for the Vampiric Council, and they were trying to decide on fonts and stuff. And this is what I mean. Who is doing this? It's Nadja. She has to decide like how to build the site and bring the computer over to Nandor because he's too busy fucking around with Gale and isn't even aware that Nadja is working on this thing. I'm just saying, every time something's actually getting done, it's Nadja that's doing it. So anyway, if he were to have access to his own social media, it would take about 2 days before people began to figure out he was a vampire, because there is absolutely no way he could be trusted to keep a secret on there. He would just start posting shit and people would have a lot of questions. It's only by virtue of the fact that they are so rarely in contact with regular people that they haven't been found out yet, and that they can like mesmerize folks to forget. You can't do that on the interwebs. Luckily, I mean, it would be really, God knows. So anyway, he holds this fucking press conference, and not only does he tell them all that the sire is missing and that they let him escape, but he takes full responsibility for it, which, again, I appreciate the sentiment. I get what you're trying to do here, bud, but you don't want to accept the blame for something like this in this way. It's not the move. There are just some things that you can't be honest about when you are in the job that he's in, and this is one of them. And then he says something about how, and I assure you all that there is no truth to the like rumor that his death will lead to the death of all vampires. And they all begin to freak out. Apparently this like legend is either not super well known or hadn't really occurred to them. And yeah, the way he frames it is like, oh, there's a lot of speculation. And again, there wasn't any speculation, which Nadja sort of chimes in with like, nobody was saying that. What are you doing? And I will say this for Nandor. As soon as all of these virtual people, he summoned them using the ether. So they're sort of, they're there in the sense of like a, what's the word I want? A hologram, I guess. It sort of looks like when they use transmissions in Star Wars and you can like see a person, either their full body or like from the waist up. But he like hangs up essentially on all of them. And Nadja just says, you have made everything 1,000 times worse. And she says this, he looks at her, he stops and looks around and starts to get this expression. And she says, no, no, no. And then he just begins wailing, crying. And we have our smash cut from there. And it was truly choice. That was good work. Because when I started off this, I said, I'll hand it to Nandor. And it's a very mild hand it to him. But I'm going to hand it to him. He knows he fucked up. At least he really like gets it here. Because there is just something about a person who fucks up and seems unaware they've done so that makes me fucking crazy. You know, like if you know that you fucked up, and this isn't an ideal world, granted, but if you know that you fucked up, there's at least the hope that you will eventually get a chance to improve your behavior by learning from this and not doing the exact same thing again. But if you don't even realize how you fucked up, it's just, you've just lost. Like, there's nothing that's going to improve from here, and you as a person aren't going to get better and understand more in the future, because this mistake is probably going to keep happening, or mistakes like it. So I really do like that he gets it here and takes it to heart. But again, I would like it if the result of him getting it were resignation, like actual resignation from his position on the Vampiric Council. Sir, you have fucked up a number of times, and you have to see that this is not the job for you. Now, Nadja isn't perfect either, but the Vampiric Council is honestly, it sounds like it's kind of a mess to begin with, and I'm not expecting perfection. So I feel like that's as good as we're going to get. So anyway, we have our friends gathered at the house with the Baron, and they are talking about the possibility, since the Baron is still alive, that maybe this legend about the Sire dying is true. We have Nandor, who blurts out that Guillermo killed you to the Baron. And then he says, Eugene. He killed Eugene, a very powerful vampire. I love that bit because it's like, it's such a dumb save. And also the look of like excitement and respect from the Baron to Guillermo. Like, he looks over at him like, oh, wow. Like, he's really impressed with him. And I don't know, there's just something very wholesome and cute about it. I even really liked the fact that he hugs Guillermo once he's like dug up and everything. And Guillermo is just like relieved, as much as it's like creepy. He's relieved that the Baron doesn't remember anything, although he does wind up being put on duty to replace this man's body parts that are falling off, because he has to shove his eyeball back in place, and his ear falls off in the foyer, which they have to go and find. It's a pretty good bit. I do really enjoy this. So then we have Guillermo doing the whole like Quint bit from Jaws, and just like, oh, so you need to catch a vampire. Well, I'll tell you what, it's not going to be easy. And he gets their attention, by the way, by just making an extremely high-pitched, annoying noise with his voice instead of a chalkboard, because they don't have a chalkboard. And I do enjoy that Colin Robinson immediately knows what Guillermo is referencing, because like, and this is one of those things that I take very personally, but I'm going to just go ahead with it. Colin's thing often is referencing other stuff and like kind of how annoying that can be. And as somebody who references other things fucking constantly, I take a little bit of offense. What can I say? I know I do it. I recognize that it doesn't work for a lot of people. I really restrain myself more than you know, which is truly frightening. But the fact that Colin knows what Guillermo's doing, I enjoyed that a lot. And essentially, everybody is so fucking at like their wits' end here, and truly sort of running. Even evil Mabel is just like, oh my God, we're all gonna die. That when Guillermo steps up and is like, I know what to do, they just go with it right away in a way that he is genuinely surprised by. And that surprise sort of goes away for a bit, because as soon as he begins telling people what to do, they're all just like, oh, what? No, fuck off. But when he tells them, oh, well, then I guess you don't need me, and begins to walk away, very quickly they all are just like, oh, all right, fine, we'll do it. So I do really, there's all these little moments in this show where Guillermo has a moment and then it's sort of taken away from him. But this one, he has a moment, and it's not like he really gets credit for it exactly, but he does, it does work out for him better than, for example, the last episode where he thought he was going to be able to influence the throne, and then they start to just catch on and not take him too seriously. So one of the things that he sends Mabel off to do with Nadja is gather intelligence about whether or not the Sire has been seen anywhere in particular. And this leads to a delightful scene where she and Nadja are on the edge of a building that has a couple of huge gargoyles on it. And it turns out the gargoyles are the Watchers. And they know what's going on all over the city and just basically gossip all the time. And what I love about this is how these gargoyles are sort of, they're played as if they are people who are watching a reality TV show and are just relaying shit in a very, what's the word that I want to use here? They're relaying things in a very unforgiving, mocking way. The way you do when you're talking about people on a reality show, even though you're talking about real people and sometimes what's happening in their real lives. And it could be something that's actually kind of fucked up or tragic, but because you are so distanced from it, because it's been made into entertainment, you're like a little bit bitchy and cruel about something that normally you wouldn't act like this about, you know? And that's sort of part of the appeal, to be honest, of like reality TV, is that you get that distance. And so you get to be a bitch because these are people that you don't really personally care that much about. And they're people oftentimes that you know are going to be just fine in general. So you don't feel worried about them in a genuine way. And there's a sense of sort of like, that's what you get. You'll be fine, bitch, you know? So I really enjoyed this scene of these two, these gargoyles, especially like the way they do this animation. I just have to imagine that the budget for this show isn't super high and they just have to do their best with what they've got. And it's really not too bad. It's got a kind of claymation-y look, to be honest. It's not actually, like, you can tell it's genuinely CGI, but it has that sort of like vibe to it. And I love when they start describing the sire, and when Mabel says genitalia like nothing you've ever seen, and one of them says, "You'd be surprised at what I have seen," but no, not ringing any bells. Speaking of bells, you know how Count Blake the Torturous is selling his haunted clock tower? Well, it turns out they had to lower the asking price twice. Just because it has half a staircase doesn't make it a duplex. And then we go to Mabel by herself, and she says, and yeah, they're like super gossipy bitches. I really do enjoy, though, for a moment, both her and Nadja are swept up in this like little bit of news, and they're just like, oh my God, in this market? That's so embarrassing. Which truly, if anybody has been, it is December of 2022. And everybody I know who has been buying a home in the past year and a half has had to pay asking price or above. They have often had a bidding war above asking price to get a home because the fucking market is insane. It is out of control insane. And I have seen a lot of people like moving and selling their homes, and I just want to know, where do they go? Because I understand the temptation to sell when you are in this kind of market, but then you have to find another place to live and like pay these same ridiculous prices for your new place. So like, do you really even make anything? Like, you just, I want to know, but I also will never be worrying about that for the foreseeable future because it sounds like a fucking nightmare. Anyway, so this bit was pretty fun, and I am really hoping that we get these gargoyles to show up again because they are delightful. And I love when one of them is like, let me tap into the network and see if anybody else has done something, has found out something. And she does that sound that like a truck makes, that like truck horn. And yeah, it turns out like that's the sound they make when they're communicating with each other, which is a very fun thing. I have always been a sucker for this sort of bit where you have something that's very ordinary and everyday, and then a piece of literature or a TV show gives it a second purpose and meaning that you could assign to it whenever it happens. Just a big fan. So the idea now that every time I hear a truck horn, I'm going to be like, oh, those are gargoyles talking to each other. I just love it. I'm really into it. So they get news about him being near, I think it's called Ozone Park, which is really, what a terrible name. And Guillermo is able to track him pretty quickly, and he tastes something and knows that it's vampire piss. And they're like, how do you know? And just don't worry about it. Just trust me, okay? But it turns out that he has gone into, he's left a body at one spot. We get a revisiting of the joke where Guillermo says carcass, and then Nandor corrects him with carcass. Why? Why though? But there it is. I also do like Colin Robinson mentioning that he put out a call on Nextdoor, which is, for those who don't know, Nextdoor is an app that you can use to communicate with people in your immediate neighborhood, asking if they'd seen anything suspicious, and it just turned into like an orgy of racism, which I have not actually. I've been on Nextdoor. I joined it like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and there was almost nobody in my neighborhood on there, so I just haven't engaged with it. But everybody I know who does have a significant number of people on there has had that experience, that it's just really super racist and like suspicious of silly shit and not really that helpful, except if there are like genuine needs. You know, somebody is like, oh, I'm looking for XYZ, and sometimes that will wind up being resolved. People will help each other, which is nice. But in terms of like the neighborhood watch aspect, it's extremely problematic. So yeah, they find this guy's arm, and it's just like the insides have been completely sucked out like a crab leg, is the way that Colin describes it. So he has gone into this store. I don't remember if they name what the store is, but it has the vibe of like Walmart or something. It's got a bunch of different stuff in it. And they are going inside, but everybody is very hesitant about it because they know that the Sire is just, you know, he's dangerous. And we have an amazing fucking moment. This is so exciting. Nandor is standing there whining about how all of this happened because of him, and how the sun's going to come up, and, you know, the Sire is going to die, and that'll be the end of us all. And Guillermo walks up to him and slaps him across the face, like hard, like really. It's not a cute little get a hold of yourself slap. It's a hand crossing the body, his head turning and his hair fluttering outward kind of slap. And he gets up in his face and shines the flashlight at him and says, stop feeling sorry for yourself, okay? And help me help you fix this. And I really do enjoy it. Laszlo's off to the side going, what the fuck? And Colin like turns and looks at the camera like, oh shit. Nandor, for a moment, looks like he might get mad just for a split second, but then he's like, hype. And then he says, let's go kill that Sire. And everybody's like, yeah. And Guillermo's like, no, well, we're not going to kill it. Like, that's not what we're supposed to do. And I really had forgotten, to be honest. That's not the point. So I was like, oh, good for you, Nandor. And then when Guillermo was like, oh, no, we're not supposed to kill him, I was like, oh, right. Oh, God. I really got caught up. I had the exact same reaction as everybody else. I was like, oh, yeah, let's do it. Oh, man. Mob mentality at work. Meanwhile, I haven't mentioned this, but the fucking Baron is riding on the back of the Hellhound, who, when they all begin to go inside the store, the Hellhound bails. And so they have to just carry the Baron in again. Eventually, he finds a Power Wheels, and he's just driving around. It is absolutely amazing. I don't know. I want them to take one of those home and for this to be a thing continually, that he gets to just roll around on a Power Wheels. But yeah, so I love this so much. So they go into the store, and it's Nadja and Laszlo. Laszlo is like lamenting that he doesn't have his magic flute, which Nadja does not seem to think is anything. And I'm really curious about it because, like, I don't remember if this has ever been mentioned before, but Nadja is a very superstitious person, and she's the only one who, like, Laszlo didn't believe that all the bad luck he was having was due to the fucking witch's hat. And he refused to hear it and wanted to hold on to it anyway. And here he believes that this flute is magic and she doesn't. So I'm going to go ahead and assume it isn't actually magic and that it doesn't do anything because I mostly trust her judgment over his. But I'm curious about it. I'm just saying. Miss T says, R.E. the Baron in the Power Wheels. Isn't it amazing? I've been waiting for you to get to this episode. Yeah, that was my favorite. Look, I think it's also influenced by the fact that I wanted a Power Wheel so bad as a kid. I mean, there is no way that you grew up in an era when Power Wheels was a thing and you didn't want one. It's the thing about Power Wheels is that you have to be so small for it to work that by the time they even came out, I was already too big for them. And if you get one for a kid, they are only going to be the size that can use the Power Wheels for like a half a year. And because kids grow so fast, and then they're never going to be able to fit in it again. And now you've got this like $300 toy that they can't even use anymore, you know? But I have always wanted one. So I think there was also a bit of like secondhand wish fulfillment watching him roll around in it. So this is when we actually get to see the Sire, because he's up on one of the aisles, like on the top shelf, knocking a bunch of shit over, roaming around, and he's actually kind of adorable. Like there's something about him that is... It almost is reminiscent to me of like Gollum with the eyes that are very soulful and sad in a way that like gets sympathy from me immediately. There's just something very endearing about this little guy. He like reminds me a little bit of a Chihuahua that is so ugly. It's cute. You know what I'm saying? So eventually they corner it, and the Baron is saying, well, he's just worried that he doesn't want to go back. That's all. And Guillermo says, well, wait, you know what he's saying? And he's like, yeah, he's speaking the ancient vampiric tongue. And it turns out that they can actually communicate with each other. And what he is worried about is, one, he thought everybody was here to kill him. And two, he doesn't want to go back to his little cell, which I don't blame him. It looks like it fucking sucks. I mean, you know, I'm taking care of puppies. I would never keep them in just one room all day. Like, and that's an actual, like, tiny animal in a very large room. Proportionally, they have a lot more room to, like, run around. I would never do that. And this guy has been in there for how many years? Like, hundreds? No. Very, very inhumane. And I understand that, like, the concern is that he doesn't know how to behave, which clearly we can see he does not. But also, apparently, there's a language he's speaking that almost nobody else speaks anymore. And the Baron, being as old as he is probably one of the only folks he's come across in hundreds of years that can actually talk to him. So it makes some sense that he would just be wilding because he doesn't understand what the fuck anybody's saying. So all this to say that they... oh my God. And I kind of had jumped over this, but there is a bit where Guillermo agrees to be used as live bait. And he doesn't want to. He sets up like this whole sort of trap thing and is feeling himself. And then when it comes time for bait, it's very clear they're planning to use him. And he's so irritated. But he agrees to it. And there not just says something about how the Sire is like fast as lightning, so you're gonna have to like go for it with him and be very careful because he will eat you probably. And Guillermo goes out there as bait, and Nandor pulls him back like sooner than he should, considering what the point was of using Guillermo. And when Guillermo asks him, first of all, Guillermo asks him, why'd you yank me out so quick? Or why'd you yank me so early, I think. Fucking Colin Robinson says, that's what she said. And then just sort of like waves his hand as like, sorry, I just found out about that series of jokes. Again, called out. Called out again. I am sorry, everybody. I guess I'm tiresome. But I also am what I am. And I can't be that sorry about it. So I suppose we all just have to face facts that as much as we would like to say Colin Robinson is other people, sometimes we have to admit Colin Robinson is us. And it's not a great thing to know about yourself. But ultimately, it's what it is, and we all can cope with the knowledge and be better because of it. So there you are. But anyway, the fact that Nandor, he pulls Guillermo back and he says, I'm the one who basically fucked everything up and put us in this position to begin with, so I'm going to deal with him. And I believe that's true, but I'm also like, are you a little bit protective of Guillermo though? Like, is that a little bit what's going on? Because I feel like that's a tiny bit what's going on. And I like it, and it's adorable, but apparently we aren't at a place where we're going to admit that. So, okay. Anyway, so they come to an agreement. What they decide they are going to, what they're going to set up is that the Sire and the Baron are going to move in together with the Hellhound. And they have this like setup, and we find this out a little bit later, that they're putting up their property on Airbnb as like this rustic cottage retreat or cabin or something, and they just eat the people who show up. And I can't be mad at it, honestly. Like, that's a pretty good scam. I thought it was going to be something like DoorDash, you know, where they were going to make a joke about like ordering your dinner, and it would be a DoorDash driver at their door and they would eat the DoorDash driver. But honestly, I feel like that would be something that would be figured out pretty quickly, because the immediacy of a DoorDash driver simply not finishing their shift or showing up, that would give them away. Airbnb is pretty good because you could have a spaced out enough series of like visits that it would take a while before anybody would begin to piece together the couples that all disappeared, or the people all were going to this one Airbnb. Like, sometimes folks do stuff like this without even telling anybody that they have a trip, or, you know. Granted, it probably would be something that would be figured out eventually, and maybe the show will explore that, because they do surprising stuff like that all the time. But I was just saying that this idea is certainly, in the short term, slightly more sustainable than eating DoorDash drivers. So I suppose that works. But anyway, there's a bit within all of this as well of fucking Laszlo having accidentally swallowed the harmonica, so every time he speaks, the harmonica sound is like under his voice. It's so stupid. I really did think it was pretty funny though. Like, I you know, so sometimes it's just the basics that get you. And I do kind of love Nandor like petting the Sire, and the Sire just sort of like looking really happy and adorable about it. I don't know. There is something extremely wholesome in a very backward way about the whole situation. And the fact that we get to see, because, you know, we've had talk of the Hellhound and the fact that he is one, but I don't feel like I said I don't really get what it is that he can do. And then we see them when they're living together. The Hellhound has gone out into the yard and he's like yelling at a squirrel. I say yelling. He's barking. I don't know why I said yelling. But he breathes fire onto the tree that the squirrel jumped up. Unexpected. So there we get our Hellhoundishness. And I really love the vibe of these weirdos all living together, and how bizarre this setup is, because the Baron is the one that looks most like a person, but he doesn't have a bottom half. So anything he needs to do, the Sire has to like physically do for him. In order to have him like open the door to greet these people, his like top body is balanced on a sort of it almost looks like the kind of pedestal you would put a dress form on. So he's put on that, and then a big housecoat is draped around him, but you can still see that there's just a stick coming out the bottom, which these people do not seem to notice right away. And he says, "You're just in time for dinner," and gestures inward. And I love that you get to see the Sire hidden right behind the door, like snickering to himself over the fact that they have tricked these people with this goofy joke. I really do appreciate this joke being used too, because the whole, like, "we'd love to have you for dinner." I know it's played. It's not really funny. It's not anymore. But like, it's still kind of funny a little bit. So getting to see him use this really old line, it makes sense he would be the one to do it. He's fucking old, man. You know? I bet he still thinks that shit is hysterical. And clearly the Sire does. So that's the end of the episode, but we get a brief scene once the credits begin rolling. And it's a pretty good bit where they're imitating the press conference that was held when Saddam Hussein was arrested and captured. And it's just Nandor and Evil Mabel and Guillermo and Nadja. Laszlo is not here, which he's just very uninterested in anything to do with this council business. But they have all affected the sort of solemn faces and positions of that moment, which you can find on YouTube. And I went and found it again because I was just sort of curious about it. And Nandor says, "Ladies and gentlemen, we got him." And there is all of the cheering and everything. And it is a weird moment. But again, I am glad that our guys got a little bit of a victory, even if they kind of didn't deserve it entirely. You know, good for them for managing to pull it out of the fire at the last second. All right. I can't be mad at that. So yeah, so that's the end of the episode. But this is a really, really fun one. I liked this one a lot. I just think I have grown particularly fond of certain like little sub storylines and characters. And when they come back up again, it's a real way to immediately get me on board. I think that, though, to be honest, I am the only one that this doesn't really work with is the werewolves, whom I don't find as funny. I feel like when they return every time, the jokes are just so incredibly obvious that it doesn't really get me. But for the most part, the other characters that we have like popping up repeatedly, mostly they work and they continue to work even, you know? So yeah, so this was a good one. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you again to Max for commissioning this. Hope you're enjoying the coverage. And until next time, y'all, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.